Rain hammered the pavement. Each drop a tiny explosion against the New York City sidewalk. But Ezra barely noticed. His heart thundered louder, racing with a reckless hope he hadn't felt in years, not since the world had branded him an outcast for loving who he did. At 23, standing outside a dimly lit Brooklyn bar, he locked eyes with Julian, the man who'd just saved him from a brawl he didn't start. Ezra's breath caught as Julian stepped closer, his leather jacket slick with rain, his hazel eyes sharp yet warm. "You okay?" Julian's voice was low, steady, cutting through the chaos of the night. Ezra nodded, too shaken to speak, his knuckles still stinging from the fight. He'd been cornered by 3 drunk guys hurling slurs, their fists itching for a target. When Julian appeared calm, commanding, and fearless, scattering them with a few sharp words and a glare that promised trouble. "You didn't have to do that," Ezra finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. He brushed a strand of wet auburn hair from his eyes, trying to read the stranger who'd just stepped into his life like some kind of guardian. Julian's lips curved into a half-smile, one that made Ezra's stomach flip. "Nobody deserves that kind of hate," Julian said, his tone carrying a weight that hinted at his own scars. He offered a hand. "Come on, let's get out of this storm." Inside the bar, the air was thick with the scent of whiskey and fried food, the jukebox humming a soft indie tune. They found a corner booth, and Ezra studied Julian under the flickering neon glow. He was older, maybe late 20s, with a quiet confidence that felt like a shield. His dark hair fell in loose waves, and a faint scar traced his jawline, adding to the mystery. Ezra wanted to ask about it, but held back, afraid to break the fragile connection forming between them. "You're not from around here, are you?" Julian asked, leaning forward, his gaze piercing yet kind. Ezra shook his head. "Just moved to Brooklyn. Trying to start over." He didn't mention the small town in Ohio he'd fled, where his family's rejection still burned, or the nights he'd spent wondering if he'd ever belong anywhere. Julian didn't push, but his silence felt like an invitation to share more, to trust. They talked for hours, the world outside fading away. Julian spoke of his love for photography, capturing raw moments in the city's chaos, while Ezra admitted his dream of writing stories that mattered. There was an ease between them, a spark that felt dangerous and exhilarating. When Julian's hand brushed Ezra's on the table, neither pulled away. The touch was electric, a promise of something deeper. As the night ended, Julian walked Ezra to his cramped studio apartment a few blocks away. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city felt alive, buzzing with possibility. At the doorstep, Julian hesitated, then leaned in, his breath warm against Ezra's cheek. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. Ezra's heart soared. "Yeah," he said, grinning like a fool. "I'd like that." The next week was a blur of late-night texts and stolen moments. Julian showed up at Ezra's door with coffee, took him to hidden art galleries, and listened to his fears like they mattered. Ezra, who'd spent years building walls, felt them crumbling. Julian was different kind, bold, a beacon in the dark. Ezra began to believe he'd found someone who saw him, truly saw him, for the first time. But there were cracks in Julian's story. He was vague about his past, dodging questions about his family or where he'd grown up. "Just a drifter," he'd say with a laugh. but his eyes darkened when pressed. Ezra brushed it off, too caught up in the warmth of Julian's smile to care. He didn't notice the way Julian scanned crowds, always alert, or how he avoided certain streets. To Ezra, Julian was a savior, the one who'd pulled him from the edge. One evening, as they sat on a rooftop overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Julian pulled Ezra close. "You make me want to be better," he murmured, his lips brushing Ezra's temple. Ezra's heart swelled, but a nagging doubt lingered. Why did Julian's phone buzz constantly, only for him to silence it? Why did he tense when police sirens wailed nearby? Ezra pushed the thoughts away, clinging to the belief that love could conquer anything. They kissed under the stars, the city sprawling beneath them, and Ezra felt invincible. He didn't know then that Julian carried secrets heavier than the night sky secrets that would unravel everything Ezra thought he knew about love, trust, and redemption. Ezra woke to the buzz of his phone, Julian's name lighting up the screen with a simple message: "Meet me at the pier. 7 p.m." Or something warm. A grin spread across his face as he rolled out of bed, the memory of their rooftop kiss still tingling on his lips. He felt alive, like New York had finally opened its arms to him. And Julian was the key. The day dragged, each hour at his bookstore job stretching endlessly. Ezra shelved novels, his mind wandering to Julian's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he teased Ezra about his Ohio accent. By evening, he was at the Brooklyn Pier, the Hudson River glinting under the setting sun. Julian stood waiting, a camera slung around his neck, his silhouette sharp against the golden water. "You're late," he called, but his smile was playful. They walked along the pier, the air crisp with autumn's bite. Julian snapped photos of the skyline, then turned the lens on Ezra, catching him mid-laugh. "You're my best subject," Julian said, his voice low, and Ezra blushed, and used to being seen so fully. They shared a pretzel from a vendor, their shoulders brushing, and Ezra felt a warmth he hadn't known since childhood, before his world had fractured. But as they sat on a bench, watching ferries glide by, Ezra noticed Julian's hand tighten around his camera. A man in a dark coat lingered nearby, his gaze fixed on them. Julian's jaw clenched, and he stood abruptly. "Let's move," he said, his tone clipped. Ezra followed, confused, as Julian led them into a crowded market street, his pace quickening. "Who was that?" Ezra asked, but Julian only muttered, "Nobody. Just keep walking." The unease settled in Ezra's chest, but he buried it. Julian was his anchor, the one who made him feel safe. They ended the night at a jazz club, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon. Julian's hand found Ezra's under the table, and the tension from earlier seemed to melt away. "I'm falling for you," Julian whispered during a slow saxophone solo, and Ezra's heart stumbled. He wanted to say it back, but fear held him back, fear of moving too fast, of losing this fragile happiness. Days turned into weeks, and their connection deepened. Julian taught Ezra how to develop film in a tiny darkroom he rented, their hands brushing in the dim red light. Ezra shared his writing, reading aloud a short story about a boy searching for home. Julian listened, his eyes soft, and said, "You're going to change the world with words like that." Ezra believed him, believed in them. Yet the cracks grew harder to ignore. Julian's phone calls came at odd hours, His voice hushed as he stepped outside to answer. Once, Ezra glimpsed a text before Julian snatched his phone away. "You can't keep running." Ezra's stomach twisted. But when he asked, Julian laughed it off. "Just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." His charm was disarming, and Ezra let himself be swayed, desperate to hold onto the dream. One night, they cooked dinner in Ezra's tiny kitchen, laughing as tomato sauce splattered the counter. Julian seemed lighter, but when a knock came at the door, he froze. "Don't answer it," he said, his voice sharp. Ezra frowned, peering through the peephole to see a delivery guy. "It's just food," he said, but Julian's relief was too quick, too intense. "You're jumpy," Ezra teased, trying to lighten the mood. But Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. Later, as they lay in bed, Julian traced circles on Ezra's back. "If I ever disappear, no, it's not because of you," he said softly. Ezra laughed, thinking it a joke. But Julian's expression was serious. "Promise me you'll keep writing, no matter what." Ezra nodded, unease creeping in. But he pushed it down, clinging to the warmth of Julian's arms. By the time winter crept into the city, Ezra was all in. He'd never felt so understood, so wanted. Julian was his savior, his muse, his everything. But the man in the dark coat appeared again, this time outside Ezra's bookstore. He didn't approach, just watched. And when Ezra told Julian, his face paled. "Stay away from him," Julian said, his voice low and urgent. "Promise me." Ezra promised. But the questions piled up. Who was Julian running from? And why did love, which felt so right, come with so many shadows? Snow dusted the Brooklyn streets, turning the city into a quiet, shimmering dream. Ezra and Julian walked hand in hand, their breath clouding in the frigid air. But Ezra felt only warmth. He was fouling hardened. Every moment with Julian made him believe love could rewrite his past. But the man in the dark coat haunted him. Ezra spotted him twice more, once near the subway, his eyes cold and unyielding, and again outside Julian's favorite diner. Each time, Julian's mood shifted, his easy charm replaced by a guarded edge. "He's nobody," Julian insisted when Ezra pressed. But his voice cracked, betraying him. Ezra wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at the edges of his trust. One evening, Julian took Ezra to a rooftop garden, a hidden gem tucked between skyscrapers. Fairy lights twinkled, casting a soft glow over Julian's face as he pulled Ezra into a slow dance. "You make me forget the bad stuff," Julian murmured, his forehead resting against Ezra's. The words felt like a confession, but they left Ezra uneasy. What bad stuff? Why wouldn't Julian let him in? They kissed, the city humming below. And for a moment, Ezra let himself drown in the feeling. But when they parted, Julian's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his face tightening, and stepped away to answer. Ezra caught fragments of the conversation sharp. Urgent words like, "Not now," and "You don't get it." When Julian returned, he forced a smile. "Work drama," he said, but Ezra wasn't convinced. The next day, Ezra found a photo in Julian's jacket pocket while grabbing it for a grainy image of Julian with another man. Both laughing, arms slung around each other. The back had a date, 2 years ago, and a name, Caleb. Ezra's heart sank. Was Caleb an ex? A friend? He wanted to ask, but fear stopped him. What if the answer broke this fragile thing they'd built? Instead, he threw himself into their routine. They spent mornings at coffee shops, Julian sketching while Ezra wrote. Afternoons were for exploring abandoned warehouses turned art spaces, hole-in-the-wall bookstores, places where they could be themselves. Julian's touch, his laugh, his quiet moments of vulnerability kept Ezra tethered, even as the questions grew louder. One night, Julian showed up at Ezra's apartment, his eyes red-rimmed, his usual confidence gone. "I need you to trust me," he said, gripping Ezra's hands. "No matter what happens, you're the best thing in my life." Ezra's chest tightened. "What's going on?" "Julian, talk to me." But Julian shook his head, pulling Ezra into a desperate kiss instead. It was fierce, almost frantic, like he was trying to outrun something. The next morning, Ezra woke to find Julian gone. A note on the pillow had to handle something. "Back soon. Love you." The words "love you" made Ezra's heart sore. But the absence stung. He tried calling, but Julian's phone went to voicemail. Hours turned into a day, then two. Panic crept in. Had Julian left for good? Was this the disappearance he'd hinted at? On the third day, Ezra went to Julian's darkroom, hoping for answers. The door was unlocked. The space a mess, photos scattered, equipment overturned. Among the chaos, Ezra found a locked box under a table. His hands shook as he pried it open, revealing a stack of letters addressed to Julian, each marked with a Chicago postmark. The most recent one read, "You can't hide forever. Caleb deserves justice." Ezra's world tilted. Who was Caleb? What did Julian do? He wanted to believe there was an explanation. That Julian was still the man who'd saved him, who'd made him feel whole. But the evidence was piling up, and it pointed to a truth Ezra wasn't ready to face. That night, Julian finally called. "I'm okay," he said, his voice strained. "I'll explain everything. I swear. Just don't give up on me." Ezra clutched the phone, torn between love and fear. "Where are you?" he demanded. But Julian hung up without answering. Ezra sat in the dark, the letters spread out before him. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing. Loving Julian was like chasing a storm, beautiful, thrilling, and dangerous. And he wasn't sure he could stop, even if it destroyed him. Ezra couldn't sleep. The letters lay like ghosts on his kitchen table, their words looping in his mind. Caleb deserves justice. He traced the Chicago postmark, his fingers trembling. Julian's absence stretched into a fourth day, each hour a knife twisting in Ezra's chest. He loved Julian, loved him in a way that felt like breathing, but the secrets were suffocating him. He went back to the darkroom, hoping for more clues. The air was stale. The scattered photos a map of Julian's life Ezra barely knew. One image stopped him cold. Julian, younger, standing in front of a Chicago skyline, his arm around the man from the earlier photo, Caleb. They looked happy, unguarded, but the date on the back was 3 years ago. What had happened since then? Ezra's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th. Midnight. Come alone." His pulse raced. Was it Julian? The man in the dark coat. Against his better judgment, he grabbed his coat and headed out, the city's pulse matching his own. The warehouse was a crumbling relic, its windows boarded, the air heavy with rust and damp. Ezra's flashlight cut through the dark as he stepped inside, his heart pounding. "Julian," he called, his voice echoing. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Julian, but the man in the dark coat. Up close, he was older, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a grin set to his jaw. "You're Ezra," the man said, his voice flat. "I'm Marcus, Julian's brother." Ezra's mouth went dry. Brother. Julian had never mentioned family. Marcus stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "You're in over your head, kid. Julian's not who you think he is." "What do you mean?" Ezra's voice shook. Marcus sighed, pulling out a worn photo of Julian and Caleb, the same one Ezra had found. Caleb was Julian's boyfriend. 3 years ago, he died. Julian was there, and he ran. Left everything behind. Our family. The truth. Ezra's knees buckled. "Died how?" he whispered. Marcus's eyes darkened. "Car accident." Julian was driving. He wasn't drunk, but he was reckless. Caleb didn't make it. Julian disappeared after. Changed his name. His life. I've been tracking him ever since. The words hit like a punch. Julian. A fugitive from his own past. Ezra wanted to deny it, to cling to the man who'd saved him. But Marcus's pain was raw. Undeniable. "Why are you telling me this?" Ezra asked. Marcus's voice softened. "Because you deserve to know who you're loving. And because Julian's still running from me. From himself." Ezra stumbled home, his mind a storm. He wanted to confront Julian, to demand answers. But part of him feared the truth. When Julian finally showed up at dawn, his face haggard, Ezra's resolve cracked. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice breaking. Julian looked away, guilt etched into his features. "I had to take care of something. I'm sorry." "Stop lying," Ezra snapped, shoving the letters at him. "Who's Caleb? Why is your brother after you?" Julian's face paled, his hands shaking as he took the letters. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt again. But then he sank onto the couch, defeated. "I didn't want you to know," he whispered. "I wanted to be someone new with you." He told Ezra everything: the late-night drive in Chicago, the fight with Caleb, the slick roads, the crash. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Julian said, tears streaking his face. "I loved him, but I couldn't face it his family. The guilt. So I ran." Ezra listened, his heart splintering. The man he loved wasn't a savior. He was broken, haunted by a past he couldn't outrun. "I thought I could start over with you," Julian said, reaching for Ezra's hand. Ezra pulled away, torn between love and betrayal. "You should have told me," he said, his voice raw. "I deserve the truth." Julian nodded, his eyes pleading. "I know. But I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Ezra didn't know if he could trust him, but he couldn't let go either. Love was messy, flawed, and Julian was both. As dawn broke over the city, Ezra made a choice: He'd stay, for now, and face the storm with him. Ezra's apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in as he grappled with Julian's confession. The man he'd seen as his savior was a mosaic of guilt and regret, pieced together by a past he couldn't escape. Yet, when Julian looked at him with those haunted hazel eyes, Ezra's heart still ached to believe in him. They sat in silence, the letters scattered like evidence of a crime. "What now?" Ezra finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian rubbed his hands over his face, exhausted. "I don't know. Marcus wants me to go back to Chicago, face Caleb's family, the courts. But I'm scared. Ezra. Scared of losing you. Of losing myself." Ezra wanted to scream, to demand why Julian had let him fall so deep without warning him of the shadows. Instead, he took Julian's hand, the warmth grounding him. "You don't get to run anymore," he said firmly. "If we're doing this, you face it all of it. With me." Julian's eyes glistened, and he nodded. "Okay. For you." The next day, they met Marcus at a quiet diner. The air was thick with tension, Marcus's gaze hard but not unkind. "You can't keep hiding, Julian," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were legal document summons, statements from Caleb's family, a warrant for Julian's arrest for fleeing the scene. Ezra's stomach churned, but Julian didn't flinch. "I'll go back," he said, his voice steady for the first time. "But I need time to make things right with Ezra." Marcus studied him, then nodded. "1 month. Then you turn yourself in, or I drag you back myself." Ezra felt a surge of protectiveness, but he stayed quiet. This was Julian's fight, and he'd promised to stand by him. The following weeks were a tightrope walk. Julian was more open, sharing stories of Caleb's laugh, his dreams, the way he'd made Julian feel alive. Ezra listened, jealousy and compassion warring within him. He saw Julian's pain, but also his strength, the way he was trying to rebuild himself for them both. They spent nights writing together, Julian's photos inspiring Ezra's stories, their creative worlds intertwining. But the clock was ticking. Ezra noticed Julian's hands shake when he thought no one was watching, the weight of his past pressing harder. One evening, at a small gallery show featuring Julian's photos, a stranger approached a lawyer representing Caleb's family. "You're a hard man to find," he said, handing Julian a letter. It was a plea from Caleb's mother, begging for closure. Julian's face crumpled, and Ezra guided him outside, holding him as he broke down. "I don't deserve you," Julian sobbed. "I've ruined everything." Ezra cupped his face, fierce. "You're not ruined. You're human. And I'm not going anywhere." They kissed, desperate and raw, the city's pulse echoing their own. Ezra knew love wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was enough to keep fighting. They started planning for Chicago. Julian contacted a lawyer, preparing to face the consequences. Ezra researched jobs there, determined to follow. But doubts lingered. Could he build a life with someone carrying so much baggage? Was love worth the risk of heartbreak? One night, as they lay tangled in bed, Julian whispered, "If I lose you, I lose everything." Ezra's heart clenched. He wanted to promise forever, but the future felt like a storm cloud, heavy with unknowns. Instead, He kissed Julian softly, letting the moment speak for him. The next morning, Ezra found a new letter slipped under his door. No postmark, just his name in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. He opened it, his blood running cold as he read, "Julian's lying to you. Ask him about the night Caleb died." The note wasn't signed, but it carried the weight of a truth Ezra wasn't sure he could face. He looked at Julian, still asleep, peaceful for the first time in days. Ezra's hand trembled as he clutched the note. He'd demanded honesty. But now, faced with the possibility of more secrets, he wondered if love could survive another blow. Ezra's fingers tightened around the note, its words searing into his mind. Ask him about the night Caleb died. He stood frozen, watching Julian sleep, the morning light softening his features. The man he loved looked like an angel, but the note suggested a devil hiding beneath. He slipped the note into his pocket, his heart a battlefield of trust and doubt. When Julian woke, Ezra forced a smile, suggesting coffee at their favorite cafe. Over steaming mugs, he studied Julian's easy grin, the way he teased Ezra about his messy hair. How could someone so warm hide something so dark? But the note burned in his pocket, demanding answers. "Julian," Ezra said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Tell me everything about the night Caleb died. No holding back." Julian's smile faltered, his eyes flickering with panic. He set his mug down, hands trembling. "I told you everything," he said, but his voice was too quick, too defensive. Ezra slid the note across the table. "Then what's this?" Julian's face drained of color as he read. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. Ezra shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Is it true? Are you still lying to me?" The calf-face chatter faded, the world narrowing to the space between them. Julian's silence was deafening, each second a crack in Ezra's trust. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice raw. "I wasn't completely honest," he admitted. "The night Caleb died, we weren't just fighting. I was angry, really angry. He'd been talking to someone else, and I was jealous. I drove too fast, not thinking straight. It wasn't just the rain that caused the crash. It was me." His voice broke, tears spilling. "I didn't tell you because I couldn't bear you seeing me as a monster." Ezra's chest ached, torn between fury and pity. "You should have trusted me," he said, his voice cracking. "I deserve to know who I'm fighting for." Julian reached for his hand, but Ezra pulled back. "I'm trying. Ezra. I swear I'm trying to be better." But the words felt hollow, overshadowed by the weight of his omission. Ezra left the cafe alone, needing space to think. The city blurred around him, its energy a stark contrast to the chaos in his heart. He loved Julian, but love wasn't blind. It demanded truth, and Julian had failed him again. He wandered to the pier where they'd shared their first date, the memory now tainted. Could he forgive this? Could he keep loving someone so flawed? That night, Julian showed up at Ezra's apartment, eyes red from crying. "I'll tell you everything. Always," he vowed. "No more secrets." He handed Ezra a journal, its pages filled with letters to Caleb, apologies, regrets, love that never faded. "I kept this to remind myself what I lost," Julian said. "But you're my future. I'll do anything to prove it." Ezra read the journal, each word a window into Julian's pain. It didn't erase the hurt, but it showed a man desperate for redemption. They talked until dawn, laying bare their fears and hopes. Ezra agreed to give Julian another chance, but with a condition: total honesty, no matter how ugly. The trip to Chicago loomed closer. Julian met with his lawyer, preparing for the legal battle ahead. Ezra found a job at a small Chicago bookstore, ready to start over again. But the man in the dark coat Marcus reappeared. His warning sharper now. "He's dragging you into his mess," Marcus told Ezra at a park bench. "Walk away while you can." Ezra shook his head. "I can't abandon him. Not yet." As they boarded the train to Chicago, Julian gripped Ezra's hand, his fear palpable. "Thank you for staying," he whispered. Ezra nodded, but the note's words still echoed. He wanted to believe in Julian, in their love, but doubt lingered like a shadow. In Chicago, they stepped into a city of ghosts. Julian's old neighborhood felt heavy with memories, every corner a reminder of Caleb. Ezra saw the pain in Julian's eyes and felt his own heart waver. They were here to face the truth, but would it bind them closer or tear them apart? Chicago's skyline loomed like a judge, its steel and glass reflecting Julian's past. Ezra felt the weight of it as they stepped off the train, Julian's hand tight in his. The city was colder than New York, its wind cutting through their coats. But Ezra's resolve burned hotter. He'd chosen to stay, to fight for Julian, even if the truth kept shifting beneath him. They checked into a small hotel, the kind with flickering lights and worn carpets. Julian was quiet, his eyes darting to every stranger, as if expecting Marcus or worse. Ezra tried to anchor him, planning their days around lawyer meetings and visits to Caleb's family. "We do this together," Ezra said, squeezing his hand. Julian nodded, but his smile was fragile, a mask slipping. The first meeting with Caleb's mother, Anna, was at a quiet coffee shop. She was small, her face etched with grief, but her eyes softened when she saw Julian. "You came back," she said, her voice trembling. Julian's shoulders slumped, guilt pouring out. "I'm so sorry, Anna. I never meant to hurt him." She listened as he recounted the crash, his jealousy, his reckless driving. Ezra sat silently, his heart aching for them both. Anna reached across the table, touching Julian's hand. "I forgive you," she said, tears falling. "But you need to forgive yourself." Ezra felt a lump in his throat, moved by her grace. Julian broke down, and Ezra held him, feeling the weight of love's cost. Forgiveness wasn't absolution, but it was a start. The legal proceedings were harder. Julian faced charges for fleeing the scene, a misdemeanor that could mean jail time. His lawyer was optimistic, citing Julian's cooperation, but the uncertainty hung heavy. Ezra sat in the courtroom, watching Julian's face, a mix of fear and determination. He was fighting not just for freedom, but for a future with Ezra. Between hearings, they explored Chicago, seeking moments of lightness. They walked along Lake Michigan, the water vast and restless, mirroring Ezra's heart. Julian opened up more, sharing stories of his childhood. His dreams before Caleb's death shattered them. Ezra saw the man beneath the mistakes, and his love deepened, even as fear lingered. One night, They found a queer-friendly bar, its walls lined with pride flags. They danced, bodies pressed close, the music drowning out the world. "I don't deserve you," Julian murmured, his lips against Ezra's ear. Ezra pulled back. Fierce. "Stop saying that. We're here. Together. That's what matters." Julian's eyes shone. And they kissed. The moment of fragile promise. But the note's shadow persisted. Ezra hadn't told Julian about it, afraid of what else he might uncover. Then, at a pre-trial meeting, the lawyer mentioned a witness, a friend of Caleb's, who claimed Julian had been drinking that night. Ezra's blood ran cold. Julian swore it wasn't true. But the doubt crept back. Sharper now. "I wasn't drunk," Julian insisted, his voice desperate. "I'd never lie about that." Ezra wanted to believe him, but the witness's statement gnawed at him. He confronted Marcus outside the courthouse, demanding answers. Marcus's face was grim. "The witness is unreliable. But the rumor's out there. Julian's got to prove he's changed." Ezra nodded, torn. He loved Julian, but love wasn't a shield against truth. As the trial date neared, Julian grew quieter, his fear palpable. Ezra threw himself into supporting him, helping with legal prep, writing letters to the judge about Julian's character. But at night, alone with his thoughts, Ezra wondered if he was fighting for a man who could never fully be his. The night before the trial, Julian pulled Ezra close. "If I go away, promise you'll keep living," he said, his voice breaking. Ezra's eyes burned. "Don't talk like that. We're getting through this." But as he held Julian, the fear crept in. What if love wasn't enough to save them from the past? The courtroom was a cold, sterile box, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Ezra sat in the back, his heart pounding as Julian stood before the judge, his shoulders squared but his hands trembling. The past months had led to this moment, where truth and love would collide, and Ezra wasn't sure which would survive. The prosecution painted Julian as reckless, a man who'd fled responsibility, leaving Caleb's family in pain. The witness, Caleb's friend, testified about seeing Julian with a drink that night, his words sharp and damning. Ezra's stomach twisted. But Julian's lawyer countered fiercely, presenting evidence of Julian's sobriety, his remorse, his efforts to make amends. Anna's testimony was the turning point, her voice steady as she spoke of Julian's regret and her own forgiveness. Ezra watched Julian's face, a mix of hope and fear, and felt his own heart mirror it. He'd poured everything into Julian, into their love, but the doubt lingered. Had he been naive to believe in a savior? Or was love about embracing the broken, trusting in redemption? When Julian took the stand, his voice was raw but clear. "I made a mistake," he said. "I ran because I couldn't face what I'd done. But I'm here now, and I'll carry Caleb's memory forever. I just want to make things right." Ezra's eyes burned, pride and pain warring within him. Julian wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough. The judge deliberated for an agonizing hour. When she returned, her verdict was measured: 6 months of community service, no jail time, provided Julian continued counseling and stayed accountable. Relief flooded Ezra, but Julian's face held a quiet resolve, as if he knew the real work was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Julian pulled Ezra into a tight embrace. Thank you for believing in me, he whispered. Ezra held him, the weight of their journey settling. We're not done yet, he said, a small smile breaking through. You're stuck with me. They returned to New York, the city welcoming them back with its restless energy. Julian started his community service, working with at-risk youth, using his photography to teach them to see the world differently. Ezra watched him bloom, the guilt easing, replaced by purpose. They moved in together, a small apartment filled with books and photos, a testament to their shared dreams. But the scars remained. Ezra sometimes caught Julian staring into the distance, lost in memories of Caleb. He'd hold him then, reminding him they were building something new. Ezra's writing flourished, his stories now infused with the raw honesty of their journey. He wrote about love, not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that survived storms, that grew stronger through truth. One evening, they sat on their rooftop, the city sprawling below. Julian handed Ezra a photo, a candid shot of them laughing, taken months ago. This is us, Julian said, his voice soft. Not perfect, but real. Ezra traced the image, his heart full. Real's better, he said, leaning into Julian's warmth. Marcus visited, their relationship mending slowly. He brought a letter from Caleb's mother, thanking Julian for his work with the kids. It was closure. Not complete, but enough. Ezra saw Julian's shoulders lift, the weight lighter now. As spring bloomed, Ezra realized love wasn't about saviors or shattering truths. It was about choosing each other, flaws and all, and building something stronger from the pieces. Julian wasn't his savior, was his partner, his equal, his home. And that was more than Ezra had ever believed possible. They stood together, watching the sunrise over Brooklyn, hands entwined. The past would always be there, but so would they, facing it side by side. Love hadn't shattered his rate, had reshaped him, teaching him that the truest hearts were the ones brave enough to heal.